From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode... You glad I woke you up this morning?
Yeah, I am.
My daughter, Charlie, 10 years old when this was recorded. When we talk about saving the planet from climate change, things tend to get real complicated, real fast. We talk about renewable portfolio standards, carbon footprints, EVs, LEED building standards, grid energy storage, magnetic levitation trains. You know, high-tech stuff. And we should. We are definitely going to need some creative engineering solutions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are warming the Earth. I'm out here in Frederick County, Maryland, with my little one in tow, to observe volunteers deploying a truly impressive mechanism against the problem. What are we doing?
We're going down to watch them dig up some, put some trees down, and interview them for Daddy's podcast.
Right. Yep. Good old-fashioned trees. For all our scientific advances, we still haven't improved upon the most elementary tool in our climate toolbox. Volunteers carry potted saplings to previously dug holes that dot the grassy hillside. A few dozen people have turned out, making it light work. Rob Schnabel is restoration scientist with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the event sponsor. He spends the first half of the tree planting event directing traffic.
You've got tulip poplar, so anywhere in this hillside, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
These guys grow fast.
Yeah, they do, exactly. 2 or 3 feet a year. I love poplars. And you've got riverbird, so you know where to put them, anywhere flat. Yep.
Planting trees here, not far from the headwaters of Israel Creek, can serve a dual purpose, Schnabel tells me.
Oh, what's wonderful, trees are one of the best ways not only for water quality, cleaning water, but they also are critical for climate change. They help absorb carbon dioxide and help put carbon back into the soil.
So, trees absorb carbon from the atmosphere and store it within themselves and in the soil. In return, they release fresh oxygen into the air. An international research team led by Swiss scientists published a study in 2019 suggesting that if we plant at least 500 billion trees across the globe, we could capture 205 gigatons of carbon, reducing the amount of atmospheric carbon by 25%. That equates to half of all the carbon released by humans since 1960. During this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're examining climate change. It's happening in the here and now, and not just at the North Pole and Antarctica. We're talking right here in the Chesapeake Bay region. With each episode, we're taking a close look at one slice of this new reality. Think of this as a snapshot in time, before things get worse, when we as a society can maybe still change the future. If you've been wondering how we can change that future, this is the episode you've been waiting for. We've been sprinkling in solutions through this season's episodes, but today, we're concentrating on what you and I, what all of us, can do to slow the climate change train, and hopefully keep it from flying off the tracks. It won't be easy, but if I accomplish anything with this episode, I want to show you that it's not hopeless either. I've learned a lot about how we can fight climate change while doing the research for this podcast season, and I can't wait to share it with you, right after this quick break.
Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you in part by Greenfin Studio, offering marketing and communications services for a greener world. Their team combines strategy, creativity, and scientific insight, setting them apart when conservation, sustainability, and scientific organizations need help telling their stories. See what they can do for you at greenfinstudio.com.
Welcome back. On this, the final episode of our first season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're looking at what it's going to take to reduce or reverse the impacts of climate change. No biggie, right? Let's start with one big number, 1.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, maybe that doesn't sound like an impressive amount, but when you're talking about heating up the planet, it is. According to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the limit for how much global average temperature can rise above pre-industrial levels before the climate really goes haywire. Think of it as a point of no return. Once we go above 1.5 degrees, we unleash a Pandora's box of worst-case scenarios. More heat waves, more plant and animal extinctions, deadlier floods and storms. The threshold was swiftly adopted by virtually every nation under the 2015 Paris Agreement. Humans have already caused about 1.1 degrees of heating. In its latest report, this past August, the UN Climate Panel said that more heating is already baked into the Earth's system. But with sustained, coordinated efforts by countries across the planet, temperatures could begin to stabilize within 20 to 30 years. To stay below 1.5 degrees, the panel says the world needs to cut its greenhouse emissions in half by 2030 and reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. In 2019, the United States released 6.6 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, ranking only behind China as the world's largest emitter. That's a big number too. I mean, where do you even begin with that? And I don't mean the royal you, I mean you personally. There are two schools of thought on this. You could go small with things you do at home, like cutting meat from your diet, switching to an electric car, installing solar panels on your house. Or you could go big, like collecting signatures on a petition, writing letters to Congress, or even running for office yourself. Theorists have a name for this debate: individual action versus collective action. Which is best for fighting climate change? I'm genuinely torn here myself. When I'm turning down my thermostat to 60-something degrees in the winter, I often wonder whether I'm making a real difference. And when I watch meaningful climate legislation go down in flames in Congress, my hope in the democratic process dies yet another death. So let's take some time here exploring the merits of each course of action. First up, collective action.
All right, I started recording. My name is Mike Tidwell. I'm founder and executive director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network.
Tidwell's advocacy group has been around for 2 decades, pushing for climate policies in Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. It is collective action incarnate, a group of citizens leveraging the weight of their numbers to sway climate policy at the state level. The strategy has yielded results, Tidwell says.
In the last 20 years, we've come a long way. Our very first piece of legislation was in 2002, and it was for a dinky little clean energy mandate that would require utilities in Maryland to get 7.5% of their electricity from clean sources by the year 2022. It was a really bad bill full of loopholes and very, very modest. Telling utilities what kind of electricity to put on the grid was really exotic and seen as radical. Fast forward 20 years, now that's just a common practice in 33 states, and it's about to become expressed in federal law. So we've come a long way, and Maryland itself now has a goal of 50% clean renewable electricity for the entire state by the year 2030.
And the group has helped boost similar climate action in adjoining jurisdictions.
We've made similar progress in Virginia, and in the district is going to hit 100% clean electricity by the year 2032. So we've made progress.
But the fight is far from over, Tidwell says. The most recent climate studies suggest that even deeper emission cuts are needed to avoid catastrophe. His group is prioritizing bills that accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles and ban fossil fuel use in new construction, and requires that existing buildings be retrofitted. If you sense a theme here, it's that collective action often entails inflicting economic pain on some of the country's most powerful interests. Yes, the energy sector, but also a laundry list of other potential industries. Industries like builders, automakers, farmers, banks, Bitcoin miners, airlines, and landfill operators, just to name a few. No one wants to be blamed for causing the planet's demise. So, as Tidwell sees it, these calls for individual people and families to green up their lifestyles, they really just play into the hands of major polluters by letting them off the hook.
For a number of years, in ways sort of encouraged by the polluters, the oil companies, the coal companies, the answer to that question was in some ways popularized that you cause global warming. You, the Smith family, you're the reason the planet is warming. So you, the Smith family, have to, change everything that you do at home. Sort of 10 things you can do at home to fight global warming, or 10 things you can do at the office to go green.
Individual actions make us feel good, and you shouldn't discount their impact entirely, Tidwell says. But
the Smith family by themselves did not cause global warming. Really, what's triggered global warming is a very slow response from our policymakers to the established science of climate change, what's causing it and what we can do about it, i.e. the combustion of oil, coal, and natural gas is causing it. And if you want to solve it, you have to get off of fossil fuels as soon as possible.
So when people ask, what's the number one thing they can do to stop global warming?
I tell them, step one, stop being an individual.
Vote politicians into office who will address the climate problem.
Yes, change your light bulbs, but more importantly, change your leaders.
And above all, he says, become part of something larger than yourself.
Pick one group that you know is fighting hard on climate change. Become a member of one group and stay in touch. Get their alerts, get their emails and texts, and they'll tell you what you can do.
We've already seen this work in real life. During the November 2020 presidential election, concerns about the economy and the pandemic were huge determinants in voters' minds. But climate change wasn't far behind. Exit polling conducted by Edison Research showed that 2/3 of voters agreed that climate change is a serious problem. Of those, 68% voted for Joe Biden, the candidate with the boldest climate agenda of any major party nominee in history. And, spoiler alert, Biden won the election. So there I was a few months later at a socially distanced outdoors press conference at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's headquarters in Annapolis. Under the Trump administration, climate change was largely ignored and even called a hoax. Now, a new U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was approaching the microphone to amplify a stark shift in the nation's stance.
If America fails to lead the world on addressing the climate crisis, we won't have much of a world left. If we succeed, we'll capitalize on the greatest opportunity to create quality jobs in generations. We'll build a more equitable, healthy, and sustainable society, and we'll protect this magnificent planet.
Blinken used this speech to call on world leaders to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, warning that a lack of action could wreak widespread social and ecological damage in coastal areas. Speaking outdoors with the Chesapeake Bay as his backdrop, Blinken described what might become of the region if sea level rise continues unchecked.
If this continues at the current pace, in just 80 years, the bay will extend inland for miles, overtaking the homes of 3 million people, destroying roads, bridges, farms. Many of the bay's plants and animals will die out. So will the fishing industry. To my children's children, the landscape will be unrecognizable.
He reminded his audience of the steps already taken by the new administration, Biden had rejoined the Paris Agreement and named former Massachusetts Senator and Secretary of State John Kerry as the nation's first climate czar. Blinken also announced a series of actions his own department would take to prioritize climate change.
Our diplomats will challenge the practices of countries whose action or inaction is setting the world back. When countries continue to rely on coal for a significant amount of their energy, or invest in new coal factories, or allow for massive deforestation, they will hear from the United States and our partners about how harmful these actions are.
If you're a believer in collective action, then Blinken's closing words from that spring afternoon in 2021 could serve as your anthem.
If we lead by the power of our example, if we use our foreign policy not only to get other countries to commit to the changes necessary, but to make America their partner in implementing those changes, we can turn the greatest challenge in generations into the greatest opportunity for generations to come. Thanks for listening.
I go up to Will Baker afterward to see what he thought of the speech. At the time, Baker was the Bay Foundation's president. It's the largest advocacy group that looks after the Bay. I toss out a few questions, but the main subject on my mind is this. Administrations have come and gone, and none has really made a dent in climate change. Does he think Biden and his administration really mean what they say?
Well, I do. And when you hear President Biden say it so often, and it rolls off his tongue without even seeming to be scripted, that makes me think he really gets it. And he started saying it on the campaign trail, and he's been saying it since day one of his presidency. I think they mean it. Now, whether we can get meaningful change through the Congress of the United States is another question.
Prophetic words. The Biden administration later in the year would propose a sprawling $2.2 trillion spending bill dubbed the Build Back Better plan. It included $555 billion in renewable energy and clean transportation spending over a decade. That would make it the country's largest climate-related investment in history. The legislation would help the administration meet its goal, announced just days after Blinken's Annapolis visit, of cutting the nation's greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030 from 2005 levels. If you've been tracking the news, you know where this is going. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, a critical Democratic swing vote in the evenly split Senate, announced he couldn't support the bill. And that was that. There's now talk of breaking out the climate section of the package and voting on it as a standalone bill. We'll see. But none of this so far has been a ringing endorsement of collective action. The Biden administration talks a good game, but when will that translate to action? You know, individual action is starting to look pretty good. Let's check in one last time this season with University of Maryland's Dr. Sarah Vaya.
All right, me too. Here we go.
Recording in progress.
Well, it's good to have you back, Sarah. How you been?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so today we're talking about what you in quotation marks, can do to help combat climate change in your own life. And I understand that this is actually your forte, right? You give talks all over the place about this.
Yeah, I have given a couple webinars, and I do talk to people a lot about it because people who are worried about climate change, of course, want to know what it is they can do about it.
Before I could pose my question about individual versus collective action, she beat me to it.
I guess I first want to comment on what is somewhat of a controversy, I think, out there in the airwaves is whether or not individual actions actually make a difference. Because a lot of people say what we really need is policy change, which of course is totally true. And yet our individual choices contribute somewhere between 50 and 70% of all carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. So our behaviors do make a difference.
Let's say that again. 50 to 70% of all emissions come from our behaviors. It's starting to sound like this isn't necessarily a binary choice, either collective or individual action. Neither will get us across the finish line on their own. If we're going to rein in our emissions, we're going to need to address both. In fact, Vaya says, Behavioral research suggests that someone taking steps to reduce their personal carbon output may be more likely to engage in the big picture policy stuff. Think of it as a gateway drug, the good kind.
Paying attention to these actions helps people get more motivated about actually advocating for policy change, as well as, talking to their friends, et cetera, about different individual actions.
What does a lower carbon lifestyle even look like? We'll talk about that right after this last break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On this Season 1 finale of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're unpacking climate change solutions. Of course, there is no magic solution. It's going to take billions of people and scores of governments all slogging together in the same direction. Collective action and individual action. And when it comes to what things you can do in your own life to help, you probably have the same question I do. Where to begin? Luckily, our climate expert, Dr. Sarah Vaya, has been thinking on this subject as well. Her approach, she says, has evolved over time. In the beginning, she believed that a full court press was in order. Change everything. Every little decision mattered. What someone has for lunch, when they shut off their lights, the length of their showers.
But I've realized more recently that there are infrequent choices that we make that have a really big difference on our overall contribution to climate change. And those are choices like, what vehicle are we driving? And what is our housing situation? If we own our own homes, how big is our home? How is it heated and cooled?
In the grand scheme of things, it's these less frequent choices with long-lasting implications that make the biggest difference, she said. Take, for example, when it's time to replace your home's heating and air conditioning, or HVAC system. You can choose a furnace powered by fossil fuels, such as natural gas or propane, or you can select a heat pump that uses standard electricity. If you install a heat pump, you're making the greener choice, Vaya says. The electrical grid is still largely powered by fossil fuels. In the Mid-Atlantic, only about 6% of the electricity on the power grid comes from renewable sources. But that amount swells to 40% if you add nuclear sources into the mix. In any case, renewable energy's share is growing and is expected to continue doing so. Over the 15 or 20-year life of a heating system, then, the carbon gap between the furnace and a heat pump will only get wider.
I think the wave of the future is to electrify everything that's possible.
When my wife and I bought our house a decade ago, several major appliances were hooked up to a propane tank buried in the side yard. The hot water heater, the gas fireplace, the dryer, the oven/stove, and the furnace. Today, all that remains is the fireplace. And we use that so little that every year our supplier charges what basically amounts to a non-usage fee. The rest are on electricity. I'll admit that my main motivation wasn't saving the planet. It was my outrageous gas bills. I'm not saying it will necessarily work out this way for you, but there certainly can be some co-benefits to going green. If you don't want to wait for the electricity grid to switch over to wind or solar energy, there's something you can do to start benefiting from renewables today, Vaya said.
So every utility in Maryland now, allows customers to choose a private company or another company to provide an equivalent amount of electricity to cover their use. And so you can choose a supplier that provides, say, wind energy or utility solar. And that's one way that you can, completely make your own energy use clean.
Guess what, apartment and condo dwellers? you've already taken a big step toward reducing your carbon footprint. In the U.S., the amount of carbon released by heating and cooling and powering all households accounts for 20% of the country's total emissions, an amount equivalent to all emissions from the nation of Brazil. The less space you have under your roof, the less energy you consume. So housing type is another one of those every so often decisions that can make a huge climate impact. You don't buy a car that often either, but the kind you buy will go a long way toward determining the size of your carbon footprint for years to come. According to federal estimates, the typical gas-powered car emits more than 11,000 pounds of greenhouse gases per year. A hybrid vehicle, which uses battery and gas power, brings that total down to about 6,000 pounds. An all-electric vehicle has no emissions at the tailpipe, so you only need to account for the power it imbibes from the electric grid. And those emissions equate to just under 4,000 pounds per year. All told, an electric car generates about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions compared to a typical gas vehicle. Just think about how many more minutes you could spend in a hot shower with all that carbon you saved. Back in January 2017, our family converted one of our gas cars to an electric model, a used 2013 Nissan Leaf. I could tell you all about it, but we just don't have the time right now. If you want to learn about my electrical adventures, I wrote a column about it a few years ago entitled, "I Love My Electric Car, Don't Get One." You can find it at tinyurl.com/Nissan Leaf Story. It bears saying, public transportation is far better than driving alone in a car from a climate standpoint. It lowers carbon dioxide emissions by 45%. You could even bike to where you need to go. No tailpipe emissions there. Though some killjoys like to point out that you should account for the carbon generated by the additional food you'll need to eat to offset the energy you lose through pedaling. I mean, wow. As you can see here, daily decisions still matter. For example, Via says, if you can set your thermostat at 68 in the winter and 78 in the summer and you're still comfortable, well, go for it. When you're out and about, combine your errands. It saves gas and time. And maybe consider eating less meat. You don't have to go full vegetarian or vegan to make a difference.
No big guilt trip about whether or not you have meat for various occasions. But I think if people think about it, you might be able to say, well, wow, I have meat 3 meals a day. Maybe I have sausage or bacon for breakfast, and I have lunch meat for lunch, and then I have meat at dinner. Do I really need to have meat for all of those meals?
I thought it would be valuable to hear what you all are doing to reduce your carbon footprint. So I invited Chesapeake Uncharted listeners to call in and leave a voicemail describing steps that they've taken in their own lives. Here's what you all had to say, lightly edited for time and clarity.
Hey, my name is Johnny Graff, and I'm from Lincoln, Maryland. Right now I'm studying sustainability through Arizona State University, which has given me a lot of opportunities to think about climate change and my impact on the planet. Sustainability-related issues are extremely complex, and kind of feels like no matter what you do, it's not going to have an impact, but I just need to remind myself that every little bit counts. I've done some of the common things that you do when trying to limit your carbon footprint. For example, I stopped eating meat and I rarely eat seafood. But more importantly, I've tried to shift my focus into eating locally grown food, which feels difficult to do regularly, but I'm sure it's especially difficult for those who don't have access to transportation or a grocery store or market nearby. My next major step is to get out of the suburbs. I want to live somewhere that wasn't designed around cars. So next year I'll be moving to Baltimore City, which I'm really excited about. I just want to drive as little as possible. Walking to stores is not something you can really do too much in the suburbs. Anyway, thanks for the podcast. Really enjoyed listening and can't wait for season 2. Take care.
Good morning. My name is Joe Stevens. I live in Janesville, Virginia on the Eastern Shore. I'm not fighting climate change. I'm embracing it and adapting to it. I'm urging the organization to do some articles on all of the multiple benefits of climate change. A longer growing season, less winter diseases and viruses. It's good for my oysters. It's good for my garden. It's good for the farmers on the shore. What I would say is if you want to do some affirmative things, eliminate the federal flood insurance program, which is bankrupt anyway. Stop encouraging wealthy people to do construction in flood-prone areas. And good luck to you.
Hi, my name's Audrey F. Schmidt. I live in Seneca Rocks, West Virginia in the Potomac Highlands. I'd like to talk about the work that I do with Propagate Ventures. We're an forestry company that helps farms identify the best fit fruit, nut, and timber crops to strategically and profitably integrate into their farming operation. It's a win-win-win for farm viability, climate mitigation, and helping to reach water quality goals in the Chesapeake Bay. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Janet Eddy, and I live in Ashland, Virginia. When my husband and I moved to a 17-acre piece of land last year, we saved it from rampant suburban development. As I walked the land, I realized it was loaded with nature-based solutions to climate change. There are 12 acres of forest filled with holly, pine, oak, hickory, and black walnut trees, and a rich floor of ferns, running cedar, and partridge berry. These woods are a great carbon sink that only need to be left alone. Then there are 5 acres of yard and meadow with a grassy lawn surrounded by a monoculture of horseweed. This summer, I added 15 native saplings to our yard. I solarized the thickest areas of dock and just finished planting those plots with native seed mixes. As the forest moves gradually into the meadow with new pine, I see the meadow moving into the lawn with black-eyed Susans, yarrow, and goldenrod. Converting the meadow to natives that support the pollinators and improve the soil is the biggest challenge here, but I'm on a 20-plus year timeline and enjoying the ride.
We heard a multitude of viewpoints and ideas there. Moving to the city to reduce your reliance on car transportation, farming more efficiently, transforming your love for gardening into a mission for the planet. I think what I like the most about many of these solutions is that greening your lifestyle doesn't necessarily have to be a drag. It's a fitting segue to our next segment. Let's call it Cooking with Whitney.
All right. Did you ask who I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who are you?
Whitney Pipkin with the Bay Journal. And we're going to fry some catfish.
I live on Maryland's eastern shore. Whitney lives in Northern Virginia just outside D.C., so our Zoom call is literally hugging the bay. My colleague is graciously obliged to pan-fry a seafood dish as we discuss ways she has found to decarbonize her and her family's diet. In addition to her work with the Bay Journal, Whitney has covered the food beat as a freelancer for several publications, including the Washington Post. So you could say this intersection between food and the environment, it's kind of her sweet spot. First into the pan is a blue catfish filet. Fishermen introduced this species to the Chesapeake Bay in the 1970s, she says.
And it really took hold and came onto people's radar in the early 2000s as a problem for other species in the bay. And
what's it do?
It just eats absolutely everything. They're voracious eaters. They can get huge.
It's time for humans to fight back by eating them. Blue catfish can now be found on many of the area's restaurant menus and at grocery stores.
Blue catfish is something I just picked it up at my local Wegmans. They have it there pretty reliably, and it was $9.99 a pound, which is far better than the other fish options. It's an example of how to deal with a problem that we're going to have increasingly as new species come into the bay.
If you've been waiting for the climate connection, here it is. As the waters of the Chesapeake warm, the composition of marine life within it will change. Fish from southern latitudes will evolve from being occasional visitors to permanent residents, and introduced species, like the blue catfish, will find it more to their liking.
People need to be flexible about what it means to eat a Chesapeake Bay diet. And a diet that's sustainable is increasingly going to include things that shouldn't be here.
So what you doing there?
I am putting some pepper and salt on catfish.
Yeah, you've got the big pepper grinder there, and
Yes, and I am unsanitary, and I pinch the salt right out of the salt bowl. So I don't know. When it says pinch of salt, I like to take it literally.
That's about it for this recipe. A few shakes of pepper, a pinch of salt, some olive oil in the bottom of a pan. A few minutes on each side on medium heat, and it's done. The result is a healthy portion of white, flaky meat without that muddy flavor that you typically get from river catfish, Pipkin says. She digs in with her fork.
taking a taste there. What's the chef say?
It's really good. I mean, I'm pretty hungry, but it's awesome.
Eating local is a key ingredient in fighting climate change, experts say. Because your food didn't have to travel as far to reach you, the journey didn't entail as much carbon-emitting transportation. Others, noting that transportation is a relatively small piece of a food's carbon emissions puzzle, contend that what you eat matters much more. But it seems to me that any day you can support local businesses while keeping a diesel truck off the road, yeah, that seems like a good day to me. Pipkin acknowledges that eating sustainably can get tricky. It's certainly not as easy as just grabbing whatever you want off the grocery shelf.
Food systems are overwhelming. They can make your head hurt trying to think. Just when you solve one problem, it's like whack-a-mole and you have another problem that you have to solve. So I find a lot of comfort in just making one plate and trying to improve that one plate or your one meal plan for your family.
One plate, meaning literally just that. A protein, a grain, and a vegetable. Find one of each and put your dinner together. My thanks to Whitney Pipkin for sharing her lunch hour with this podcast. We've been all over the Bay region this season. We have witnessed damage from climate change in places like Ellicott City, Annapolis, Eagle Harbor, Norfolk, and Dorchester County. We've heard from the real people dealing with increased flooding, deadlier storms, and sweltering heat. Today, we've encountered a smattering of potential solutions. There are, of course, many more. And yet, we have barely begun as a society to implement them. We maybe have 2 or 3 decades, according to the world's climate scientists, before we reach a tipping point when time is run out to avoid a worst-case scenario. That means we must act swiftly and meaningfully to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't seem like we should have to drive our economy into a ditch to do it. But we should keep in mind that without a healthy, habitable planet, the economy will be in jeopardy too. Even if we meet our carbon reduction goals, some climate impacts will be inevitable. So we need to continue helping coastal and flood-prone inland communities adapt to rising waters, especially those places where such investments have been lacking in the past. Above all, we should take the mentality we have for hurricanes and adopt it for climate change. With hurricanes, our technology allows only a few days' notice, maybe a week at most, but we throw everything we have at the problem to get people out of harm's way and to protect our most treasured assets. Well, another storm is headed our way. Our technology this time says that instead of days to get ready, we have years, maybe even decades. But it's a storm on a scale the likes of which we have never experienced. Should we wait until the last minute to act? Or do it now? I can't say what our future will be, but the image that brings me the most hope is from my tree planting excursion with my daughter, watching her transfer a tiny tree from its plastic pot to its forever home in the western Maryland countryside.
You're going to want it, that's got to be deeper, Charlie. There's too much dirt in there. Go ahead and spear that dirt out and put it to the side with, here. Get in there. Okay. You got it, Charlie?
Yep.
You got a lot of dirt left in there. How'd that happen?
I digged a little too much.
Okay.
See you later for Season 2 of Chesapeake Uncharted. Thanks to Greenfin Studio, which combines creativity and communication savvy with scientific insight. Visit greenfinstudio.com to see how they can help your organization engage a wider audience. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at bayjournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.